Hello, everyone. My name is Chandler Packard. I am the Director of Customer Success at OpFocus. I want to thank everyone for joining us today as we explore the topic of building customer success excellence in Salesforce. What a mouthful. We're really excited to have everyone join us today and walk through this amazing topic. Before we really get in, I'd love to just quickly introduce who we are at OpFocus. So we are a revenue operations consulting firm. We work with SaaS organizations who are growing rapidly and invariably find themselves with a disorganized or unreliable tech stack. Our experts partner with these clients to normalize their tech stack, enabling Salesforce to become a single source of truth so that they can scale their ARR sustainably through data-driven processes, actions, and decisions. So if you'd like to know more about us, please head over to opfocus.com. And at the end of the presentation, we'll be discussing some opportunities for you to participate in some upcoming events. So a little bit on logistics for today. So today is a panel discussion. So I'll be leading the conversation with some prompting questions to our panel. We'll then dive into discussion and hear from various folks based on the topic that I'll present. While they're speaking, feel free to leverage the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window. I'll be layering in those questions as they make sense throughout the presentation. Following this presentation, we'll be converting this recorded session into some blog post content. So be looking out for that as a follow-up. And if we aren't able to get to some of your questions, we'll try to answer those within the blog post as we can. So today we're going to span some topics. We're going to have some discussion around some topics. Some are going to be more strategically oriented. Some are going to be more tactical. I do want to say, though, that today's discussion is not meant to serve as a comprehensive guide on Salesforce and customer success. Instead, I really hope that everyone can leave this conversation feeling inspired and challenged in the way that we think and realize our customer success strategies through our technology. So really excited to dive in to topics like how does Salesforce fit into your CS strategy, pitfalls to avoid when building Salesforce functionality, and then some specific use cases on processes we can target to solution within Salesforce. So it would be a boring call if I was on here by myself. So I'd love to introduce our experts that we have with us today. So guys, if you could go around and introduce yourselves. Jay, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Good to see everybody. My name is Jay Nathan, Chief Customer Officer at HireLogic. We are a about 400-person company based out of the DC area, and we focus on customer and community engagement and marketing with our customers. We have platforms that help our customers do all those engagement kind of things. So good to be here. Thanks for having us, Chandler.
Thanks, Jay. Bettina?
Sure. My name is Bettina Fowler. I work with Jay at HireLogic, so I don't have to explain any more about what our company does. But I'm the SVP of CS operations, so I get to work across all the different ops groups from product to finance to sales, and all of us care about Salesforce. So a great opportunity to learn about what's important to everyone in Salesforce there.
Awesome. Thank you. Joshua?
Sure. Joshua Lyons, Director of Customer Success with the company called InfoLock, based out of Arlington, Virginia. We focus on information security, data management, have a bunch of different service lines. A little bit of a different here, but we're not a SaaS organization, we're a services firm. So there's a little bit different mix on how CS implements tools as well as process. I'm looking forward to speaking with everybody about that today.
Thank you, Joshua. And lastly, Mike.
Hi, everybody. Mike Olander, Senior Consultant in the Growth Advisory Practice here at OpFocus. Before joining OpFocus, I worked in Salesforce for a client for about 5 years. Got a chance to really get hands-on building out their CS processes within Salesforce, something that I always enjoy talking with clients about. So I'm excited to be here and share some insights with you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys, and thanks everyone again for joining the conversation. We're really excited. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So Jay, I'd like to point this first question in your direction. So as a leader in customer success, how does Salesforce fit into your strategy? Are there any key principles or best practices that you either lead with or have learned from in your experience using Salesforce?
Yeah, Bettina sort of touched on a little bit already, right? Salesforce is central for us at Higher Logic to everything we're trying to do with our customers. It is the central source of truth, should be the system of record for any interaction that we have with the customer. It doesn't mean it all has to be initiated or generated out of Salesforce, but for us, having it all land in one spot is really key. It's the only tool in our company that, maybe besides a couple of other like productivity tools that we use, but the only tool that everyone has access to across sales, customer success, support, implementation, all the different areas of the customer organization that fall under the area that Bettina and I work most closely with, but also our sales organization, our marketing organization. So principally speaking, I think, as long as Salesforce is your central system of record, then there's an opportunity to leverage it for things you need to do in customer success and stay abreast of with your customers.
Oh, that's great. Any other thoughts from the team?
Well, I'm
Awesome.
sure we're going to focus on this in a little bit, but starting the process before rolling out any tech stack is always important. So that's one thing that I, at a strategic level, wanted to point out. And we certainly have tried to eat our own dog food at InfoLog in doing that.
Love that. And so how do you maybe speak to how then assuming that Salesforce is your system of record, then how do you position Salesforce as a tool to support your entire client's journey? So thinking about how you reach across the aisle and really support other organizations or operations teams you might be interacting with. Or what are some things to consider in choosing Salesforce and implementing that?
Well, I'll just jump in. I think, from my point of view, one of the first questions that I always ask about any new process that we're setting up is, how are we going to report on it, and how does the information that comes out of that, the data that comes out of that process relative to the customer experience, how does it end up back in Salesforce? So there are, like I mentioned, a number of different tools that we use that would sit on top of that. But to have that, the central version of the truth is so key for us. But it's also a challenge, and I'm curious how, Josh, y'all are solving this. I know Chandler and Michael, you see this all the time in your work, but it's also not a data warehouse, right? It's not designed to be a data warehouse. It can get very expensive if you use it that way. So, I guess I'll pose a question back out to everyone else too. So how do you use Salesforce without it becoming a data warehouse and racking up massive amounts of data that aren't very easy for people to actually use to get meaningful information out of it about the customer base?
Yeah, I like how you started with the how. How are we going to do this? I like to follow that up with why. Why do we want to do this? What is it? What problem is it going to solve? Because I think we all face the challenge of too many data fields within Salesforce because everybody wants to get something out of it. So making sure that everybody has a good understanding of why we want to go about this, how's it going to solve the problem, but not become overwhelming. Because I think Salesforce is best used when it's as simple as possible for users to take part in importing information and viewing information. At the same time, there's a lot of things we need to do. So getting that why question asked, and then having the different business unit leaders agree upon what they're trying to do, why they're trying to do it, and have a general consensus across the board, which isn't always easy, but that can certainly help with the strategic vision of how to roll out the technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I hear what you're saying. I mean, I think from my experience, it sounds like one of the principles we need to lean on is to have a collective understanding of what these tools are going to be. So a clear understanding that we're not going to build Salesforce to become our data warehouse, and instead that data warehouse will have its own strategy, obviously depending on your organization. But I think starting with an understanding of where does Salesforce start and stop, and where is it in terms of our overall tech strategy, and that'll really help you understand once you identify the process, really understand why you want to implement that process, then the decision on where to implement that becomes a bit easier, right? And it's not that you lead with, hey, Salesforce is a shiny object, it can solve all my needs, let me go shove everything in it. You really start with process, like you mentioned, Joshua, and start with an understanding of principally how does this tool fit into my total tech stack. Any other thoughts from
the most the saddest thing I've ever seen is Salesforce used purely as a pipeline management tool for sales, right? I mean, to your point, Chandler, you don't want to go getting enamored with it and build things that you can't maintain, but there's just a lot of power in a platform that allows you to customize so heavily to, I mean, every single Salesforce instance is unique, which is probably why OpFocus has such a great business, right?
Yeah.
But in my mind, you think about the customer journey, the conversations that you had pre-sales that led to a booking, that led to a new customer coming on board. Those just keep going, just right through the relationship, right? And so every piece of the customer journey, the relationships that we have along the way need to be tracked in Salesforce. The touch points that we have with those people need to be tracked in Salesforce. The key notes, the health of the customer. There's just so many different data points that can really fit in there to help you piece together a full story about what's going on with the customer. One of the first things that I do, we use Gainsight. We also have Client Success as a customer success tool for a different part of our business. But one of the first things that I do when I am asked to get on the phone with a customer is I go straight to Salesforce to see what we've consolidated in there from both of those platforms around those customers, so I can have some context before it. So if you think about from the leadership perspective, how do we pump as much information into that repository as possible, but also make it consumable? So, really curious how others are doing that. Even folks that are just attending the panel discussion here today, would love to hear how others are getting that concise view without being too much data, and being able to get the main points of the relationship across.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, feel free to Jay's point, feel free to add your comments there and how you guys are handling these questions as well. I'd love to hear from you and how that's going. So that kind of leads us in. Yeah, go ahead, Mike, please.
One thing quick there, because I know Jay brought it up in saying it's not a data warehouse, and I think that's important. It's important, something to know about Salesforce. You're not going to pipe a whole bunch of data into it, but I don't think that means you're never going to throw some types of data from your software tools that are in there. So from your CS system or from your SaaS platform, you don't have to bring every piece of data in there, but it can be very valuable to include certain types of summary level information that gives you a picture of the client, because you get the advantage at that point in time in Salesforce of being able to trigger alerts off of it. You also get the advantage of somebody can easily come in to see that account in Salesforce and see their health. They can see whatever your key metrics are on your SaaS platform. They can see that all at the account level, and you can report on it or trigger a notifications over time. But you don't have to sit there and necessarily have every piece of the health component. That can live in Gainsight, it can live in a tool like Domo or another platform like that, but it gives you just a high level view at the account level within Salesforce.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mike. And it's, Jay, you said something that strikes me as, customer success really touches the entire client story or journey with you at the organization. And so that inevitably leaves us as customer success leaders to have to work with all the different parts of the organization, right? And hope that we're influencing those parts of the organization to ensure that they're leveraging the technology to promote that customer journey and our expectations and strategies there. So Bettina, I'm curious to understand from your perspective and your role at HireLogic, and as you've worked with other ops teams, what lessons have you learned or pitfalls have you encountered specific to Salesforce? I'm curious if you guys have uncovered any tech debt, or maybe speak to some opportunities that you've had that you've seen success in, and kind of integrating that data and working with other teams.
Yeah, we've recently started working together quite a bit more. Salesforce used to be a tool that was owned by sales. So we kind of worked around how sales wanted it configured. We worked around if they made a change and it broke something on our side, being like, hey, you forgot, like we use this too. And so we've recently instituted a Salesforce governance group that meets once a week, and it has all of the ops leaders in it. And we kind of go through all the requests that folks have to make changes in Salesforce. what they want to change, what processes they want to change, and what fields they want to add. We have certainly fallen into the trap of adding many, Jay, close your ears.
I know, I see it.
many fields to our account layout page. And I have to say, so I've worked at HireLogic for about 7 years, and since it was a 35-person company to a 400-person company, we've never really sat down and refreshed our account layouts or our record types. We've just added more stuff to the same, page. And this includes 6 acquisitions, right, Jay? So we just add and add and add. And I think it's so important. And we learned this lesson the hard way, and we still haven't gotten out of the hole, but making sure that as you grow as an organization, you revisit how your pages are set up and what your layouts look like and what's important for this record type versus that record type. And also for the users that are logging in, there's a lot of things that I don't need to see. I know Jay had mentioned about the importance of seeing the activities that are going into Salesforce, but a lot of times, even a while ago, during a sales process, the activity history is bananas, right? I mean, I'm never going to look through all those activity histories, but if we tagged them a certain way and then reported on them differently, it'd be easier to look through that. And so I do think that we fell into a data overload category, but with our Salesforce governance meetings, now when anyone says, oh, the easy answer is just create a new field in Salesforce and then I can track the information. That's just, it's very easy to do that. And now we question it and we talk about it and we talk about, is there a different way to do it? We recently had this huge win, which no one in this room is going to care about except me, but where we actually all agreed to delete 27 custom fields that we had added to our account layout page.
I care.
Awesome.
Exactly. And that's kind of where we're getting to, is finally refreshing. And so I would hate for everyone else to fall into that same hole as us. So.
Oh, that's great.
I think just to build on that a little bit, I think that this whole idea of governance is really important. And in going back to the strategy question, I know you're trying to move on to the topics too. I'll
you're good.
Quick, but like I think a lot of times, and this is good for probably the listeners to think through when you're thinking about whether to use a customer success platform in conjunction with Salesforce or not. What that sometimes does is gives you the ability to move independently of sales and the marketing team, right? Which is valuable, but then you have problems like Bettina just described, which is, okay, they're going to go do their own thing because we got our own tool over here. And before you know it, we've got silos, and silos are never good in a SaaS company. So I think, what Bettina and the team are doing here with the governance model around all of it, whether we use other tools or not, again, it's still ought to get funneled down into Salesforce. We got to be thoughtful about how that's designed.
It also helps us keep, like you had said, Jay, it helps us keep track, since there are so many integrations into Salesforce, important integrations that come in from sales tools, from CS tools, from finance tools. We've broken a few things because we make one change and don't think about the impact somewhere else. And this helps us. We've got all the players in the room at that time that are going to say, no, you can't do that because this depends on that. And so we have to think different business solution. So it's been super helpful.
It's always fascinating for me to see the governance side of Salesforce. And it's something that I think most companies don't start thinking about it until it's too late. They don't start thinking about it until you have 500 custom fields, you've hit the limit and wow, we have to go delete these now, or we have to call up Salesforce. When most people should probably be thinking about it when there are only 30 or 40 people in the company, because it's a whole lot easier to have the right habits in place at the outset than it is to try and unwind things later on. And Salesforce is so customizable, which is a great thing about it, but it also leads to that if you don't have a lot of governance around it, you can break things very easily. If you have your own software platform, you're going through an entire release process with your engineers to make updates to that software. We have to think of Salesforce as the same way. Salesforce is a software tool that should be run almost like a product, and it should sit there and have the same checks along the way to make sure that what we're building works for everybody and that what we're building doesn't break anybody. So to hear that on the governance side, just some thoughts from my experiences on that and the challenges behind that.
Yeah, and before we move on, if there's any attendees that they're in a small business, say their SaaS has just started or something along those lines, I've been with small business for the past 20 years serving enterprise customers. And this is obviously an intense issue that comes up in a small business because you have maybe some key leaders that just say, go get this done, go get that done. But setting up some sort of governance in a small business to be able to govern how this is going to happen, so where you're just not getting a request to do something by somebody above, that can be a huge bane on a problem with structuring the strategy of what to implement, what not to implement. So putting some sort of governance structure in place and selling that idea to the leadership that this will be done in the most proper way. This is what best practice that other organizations are using. That's something that I would definitely suggest to the smaller companies, even if they don't think it's all that important, or oh, hey, I'll just take care of this on my own and try to fight this battle. Setting up some kind of governance committee is a really, really good idea.
That's fantastic. I love hearing that. I mean, from a consulting standpoint, we often find, to Mike's point, organizations that have not implemented this, and that's precisely why we get brought in. And I want to mention too that I think what's great is that whether you're a small organization or a large organization, that if you keep your North Star, your gauge at the idea that this technology really starts enabling you to drive process and to drive action, and it's not just a matter of normalizing our account structure so that customer success calls this client the same thing and that the reporting looks the same. Once we actually get that normalized and your tech stack's working for you, you can start thinking about how that technology can really leverage process and eliminate waste in your process. And so when you start to position this as a real tool for you, it encourages you to think about that tool in a way that we don't want a lot of noise. I don't need a lot of noise. And also, it's not just a matter of presenting a piece of information to somebody, but really thinking about how that person, like, take it a step further and say, how is that person going to use that piece of information, and what are their downstream processes? And that's where a tool that, from my experience, like Salesforce, really allows you to aggregate that and really think more strategically about how our processes are shaped and how we share information across teams, and how do we allow the activity in one team to actually drive behavior across the organization. And governance is so critical to enable you to do that. And when you have that, Josh, to your point, as a small organization, you can actually do a whole lot more with fewer resources, and a really powerful way. So really love hearing that. Any other thoughts, guys? As a quick reminder, feel free to use the Q&A feature below if you guys have any questions. And also, if you'd like to raise your hand and speak at any point here at the second half of this call, feel free to do so, and we can take you off mute and have you speak in. I'm sure there's some folks. I know when I sit on these calls, I usually have some burning questions in my mind as we go through. So thanks for sharing on that, Bettina. Looking at the next topic, Joshua, I'd love to continue to kind of dive into this topic of process, and I'd love to kind of just, if we could, just understand the current state of your CS organization at InfoLock. I know you and I have had some discussions that you're targeting Salesforce to implement some processes. So curious, why do you see Salesforce as a valuable tool for you right now, and why Salesforce and not a CS platform like Gainsight?
Sure. So as far as the organization goes, we have myself and one other CSM that works for me, and like everybody on this call, we're hiring. So we're looking for that next person. So it was really important at this point to start getting something that allowed me to automate a lot of our processes. But that goes back to, we do have processes, and that was very important from the outset to start building the process structure for our CS organization well in advance of even thinking about implementing some kind of technology outside of the standard. Let's start with spreadsheets and simple things, Word docs, etc. So what we set out, or what I set out before I hired my first CSM late last year, was to kind of create the beginning of a CS playbook. And once my new CSM came on board, she and I worked together to consolidate that information and it wasn't just a CS playbook dealing with how we work with customers. It was also internal resources and how to do the job, if you will. So we used that to onboard her and then take that experience and transform that into something really standardized so that every onboarding of a new CSM would have that standard process. And we did similarly, similar things with our customer interactions. And we created a pretty long, in-depth CS playbook that has different components to it that talk with internal processes, external processes, and then getting to those external processes where we interact with customers. We lined out all the steps that we needed to take with a customer, and we have different lines of service that we work with. And those different lines of service have different ways that we interact with customers. So understanding all of those ways and doing a long value stream for each one of those services was something that really started our process of identifying all the different milestones, where we might have gaps in between milestones so that we could figure out how to fill those gaps. So long story short, we identified the whole process from start to finish for each of our service lines of business on how we were going to interact with a customer. And that laid the foundation of understanding how we could even implement a tool like Salesforce. So said a lot there, but as implementation goes, and this is something just recent within Salesforce, we have configured it to take the place of those original spreadsheets that we had from the beginning of capturing data. But a spreadsheet, that's all it can do. It captures data and then you can refer to it. It doesn't actually drive any process. It doesn't automate anything. So we had all of the processes in place combined with the information that was available to us for all of our customers. And then we started picking fields. What are the most important fields that we want to capture? So as Jay mentioned early on, that we can report on to our peers as well as our customers when needed in executive management. So we went ahead and configured some things. One example is the onboarding process. So we created a custom object for our onboarding process, took all the fields we have mapped that were important to us to report on and capture, et cetera. And we created a custom object with standard information like the who's involved internally, who's involved externally, the customer, are there any partners involved, any notes that people should be aware of. And we tried to mix it between custom form fields, like you could text fields, if you will, for information that needed to be free form, but also tried to capture or put together fields that were like drop-down boxes and check boxes, date fields, things that we could truly report on. But there's an importance to each of those types of information. And then in addition to the standard basic overview stuff, then we started asking some more strategic information that we could capture, like the customer's technical requirements or their business objectives that they're trying to capture, any licensing that was involved from partners and whatnot. And the beauty is this information, and we've been talking about sharing across the organization, it's available to everybody with a Salesforce license within our organization, and they can see what we've captured. And the importance was we're now able to start implementing a CSM within the end of the sales process, start capturing this data, and it's held throughout the contract execution all the way through the beginning of service delivery and the true onboarding of the customer. And everybody sees all of that information that's not necessarily retained in a statement of work or a purchase order, that is kind of sometimes verbally just the sales guy reaches out to the engineer who's going to deliver something. Hey, this would happen. This is what we need to do. It's all there for everybody to see. And it's you could report on it, etc. So we also capture a lot of the onboarding process, like certain milestones, like they've gotten run books, or we've scheduled the kickoff meeting has been scheduled, things along those lines. So we're capturing all that data, and now it's being shared across the organization in a format that we can automate and have triggers, kick off notifications, activities for the CSM or any other individual within the organization.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Joshua. And I can see how valuable Salesforce has been for you as even just as a proving ground, right? To just simply convert and then expose that data to more folks in the organization who may not have even realized that information was valuable to them, or they worked without asking for that information because they just didn't know it existed, right? And so that I love how we can see how you've implemented the opportunity to really carry that customer's journey and that story out past the end of the sales cycle within your CRM, which is what we're speaking to, right? So that's exciting. Any other thoughts from the team based on that? Curious.
I just really liked how you described the simplicity of those objects, Josh, because I think it's easy to overthink this stuff and to make it more complex than it actually needs to be. And so, and it goes back to maybe one of the pitfalls of implementing, and this is Salesforce, probably any tool, is start with the end in mind. Like how are you going to use the data? I'll tell a very quick story. One of my favorite stories from a company I worked for years ago was I inherited a team and they told me, we have to go in and fill in this report every week. And it's taking us a really long time to fill in all this data each week. It was basically like a project management report. And, but we've got to do it because the management team told us we had to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Do you know how they use the data that goes into this report each week? And they're like, no, but it's part of the process and we just got to do it. And I was like, all right, how about this? Let's just stop doing it just for 2 weeks. I want you to stop doing it. And we're going to see if anybody makes any noise. And guess what? There was no noise, right? So we gave everybody 2 hours back in their week. They didn't have that cumbersome tool to use. And then we started building out what we actually needed. So start with the end in mind and don't make your teams go through a bunch of process headaches every day, every week, when you just need this much information to prove out what you're trying to do and the story you're trying to tell about the business.
No doubt. And we tried to make it easy for other peers in different silos, if you will, even though we don't really have silos at InfoLock, which is awesome. But we took on this as the customer success group. We took on not only creating this functionality, but also inputting the information, the onboarding handoff form, which I was referring to earlier. We said, hey, we'll do this. Just need a couple minutes of your time. We'll schedule it with you. And then we'll take that information, send it off to the project management office. There's a trigger that does that now. But it's also, I think, important to step up in customer success if you're trying to do this and leverage all of these things that are able to be shared throughout the organization and say, hey, we'll go ahead and do it. We'll be the people that take action and we'll do it. Just give us your feedback and we want to make your job easier. And truly that's what it is.
It's interesting how, like, I hear in that, like, we as customer success leaders for our clients, we can even view our own internal stakeholders as our clients as well. And how do we think about the internal user experience of our employees and our partners within our own environment and tool, right? And I think that's a key way. I think if we lean on that and improve their experience internally, then that inevitably leads to them having easier access to information and also a smoother way to perform their duties, which as we said earlier, it's a cross-functional effort to support our customers. And so it should help them become stronger advocates for driving customer success as well. So really, really exciting there. A lot of opportunity. Awesome. Yeah, and I love, gosh, there was something else you had said, Joshua, that stuck in my mind, but I think starting, I think Erica's mentioned it's, starting with that why. And I think drawing us all back to why we're doing this and understanding, like I said, designing for the customer experience and designing for that user's experience. I think if we really set those principles within our own organization and understand our role as CS in that for our organization, it can really help us enable stronger client interactions in those moments of truth that we have with our client. And also, I think from a CS perspective too, we need to make sure we influence. I think Bettina, you may have mentioned it, or someone mentioned that you might have a certain area of your business where they're managing the contract and they have a lot of information they need to capture and consume for their own specific role. But there's something in there, there's information they're also working with is very important to downstream and upstream players to see and understand. And so it's not a matter of just having the contract be available for your downstream players, but actually understanding what in that contract, what in that SOW is going to help me as a PS, as a professional services person or an implementation specialist, drive success for my client. What do I need to know? What should I capture from these individual groups and ops teams to really surface to the rest of the organization. And I think from a client success perspective, we have the onus to really encourage and influence that customer success philosophy across the organization in a big way. Cool. And I love it. I see a lot of folks talking about Excel being the win. I'm a huge Excel user myself. I think it will continue to be a great place for us to start. And honestly, I know Mike could probably speak to it. Oftentimes we run into clients who they see the shiny object of Salesforce, they go out and they create a bunch of custom objects, bunch of fields, and they're like, I've got all my stuff in there. And they didn't really ever take the time to say, like, can you build this process out just using Excel? Can you identify those fields that are really important? Can you play this process out, almost storyboard this out with the rest of your organization before you go in and start looking at Salesforce? And then what Salesforce can do in working with partners in this is can identify ways that you can really improve your process and start to influence that. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're buried in tech debt in your Salesforce organization, it's never a bad time, whether you're starting from scratch and you're in a great position where like Joshua is, or you're buried in tech debt. It's important to really draw back to that same principle of like, why are we doing this? And can we prove this out without worrying about the debt that we're in our stack there? Right. Love it. Mike, I'm curious, we've had a lot of questions and some back and forth, and thank you everyone for participating in the chat there. I'm curious, we had a couple of questions I think you've responded to, but want to get your perspective, Mike, on maybe some of the good, some of the bad, from your experience, where does Salesforce really stand up as an opportunity for folks to leverage in the world of CS, and then maybe where it doesn't? And maybe talk a little bit about this data warehousing problem and why the data it needs to live in a different place, where that kind of starts and stops.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I'll start off with just the CS side of it and then move over in towards the data warehousing side of it. In the CS world, Salesforce does a lot of things very well. And I think one of the biggest things that Salesforce does well is it can provide structure and automation around processes that you have within your organization. So I think Salesforce, if you're looking at something like onboarding, you might be tracking onboarding in an Excel sheet today, which is a great place to start, but at some point in time, you're going to want to move that over into Salesforce to be able to capture what's going on as part of the onboarding process. What was the handoff like from sales to CS? What tasks do they need to complete throughout the onboarding process? If they're short on those tasks, send an email directly to these people to let them know they're falling behind and lagging behind in onboarding. I always go towards onboarding first as the first thing to get into Salesforce, because I think it is so important in a SaaS-based business. You have to have that time to value. The longer it takes for somebody to recognize that time to value, they're already at a churn risk at that point in time. So onboarding is an incredibly important one to capture within Salesforce, but there are so many others. Just things like renewals. That's something where if you tie that in with a tool like CPQ, or even if you don't have a tool like CPQ, renewal is a completely different process from a new business process. And yet so many times I see just one record type where it's the same sales process. They're completely different. I think looking at account health, so we've talked about that piping in from other systems, but you can store that in Salesforce and be able to report on that, be able to trigger off notifications that makes people's lives easier to see this client was healthy a month ago and now they're not. What has happened? It allows not only the CSM to dig in, but their boss and other people up the management chain as well. And one other big piece that I always think of from the CS world that's relatively easier to implement is just gathering feedback, and not only gathering feedback, but actioning on the feedback. So oftentimes, I mean, how many times do we have an NPS survey where we sit there, say some things that, oh, we're not really a big fan of this project or this product, never hear from them ever again. If somebody's giving you feedback that is negative, that is absolutely a chance to learn from that. And if you're capturing that in Salesforce, you can see that over time, and you can see that in multiple different areas. Maybe they had a bad support experience. Maybe they had a bad onboarding experience. Maybe some new release they're not really understanding in some way, shape, or form. If you're tracking that in one place, ideally Salesforce, you can sit there and you can action on it. So those are some examples of certain things that I think are really important to capture in Salesforce. From a data warehousing perspective, we had a question there, which would you tackle first, a data warehousing or a CS tool? I think data warehousing first, because Salesforce is not built to be a data warehousing tool because you have to pay for storage. So if you want to store all your data in Salesforce, you could, but you're going to pay a whole lot of money for that as time goes on. Data warehousing, storage and data warehousing is so much cheaper in comparison to Salesforce that you're going to want a tool that stores data from a whole bunch of different locations in a data warehouse that you can then sit there and aggregate and pipe out to other places, like a tool like a Domo or a Tableau to run visualizations on, or even back into Salesforce at that point if it's from your software. Data warehousing is going to support the entire organization. It's going to support literally every piece of it in some way, shape, or form. And that's something that Salesforce is not built for that. You can build out Salesforce to manage these CS functions without a CS tool. And you can probably learn a whole lot in the process about how to further optimize those so that when you go to a CS tool, you're all good to go at that point in time. But data warehouse, I think, is a very underrated and a very incredible tool that most organizations can take advantage of.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah. And I'll add to that. I think when you start looking at leveraging your product usage data and you really get into some very granular transactional level data, I think that's where you really start seeing these data warehouse strategies really become useful and pertinent. And I also think, I've heard conversations as well as, if you have a tool, like if you have a CS platform, I think in the same way that Salesforce can become your data warehouse, I think you could get in the same trap with Gainsight or other large platforms to say, I'm going to store all my data here as a CS person, and all my data is here. It's all I need. And you forego the opportunity to see how you can aggregate the data that you have in Gainsight and other tools like your product and other auxiliary tools as well, to really support the organization and push data effectively without running into high costs for storage. And you really get more control of that as you go. But I will say also, I think you work your way towards that, right? And I think, in Joshua's instance, I would imagine they're proving things out. And so whether you're trying to prove that out in a point solution or you're proving that out through some custom build in Salesforce, just understand that there's a point at which you need to start that conversation on the data warehousing. And I don't think it should discourage you from getting started somewhere. But it's definitely a principle and a reality that will become an issue for you down the road.
I'd be remiss if I didn't wear my data security hat and say, before you're looking at data warehousing solutions and whatnot, it would be a good idea to tackle data governance. We were talking about governance earlier, but data governance within your organization, because data propagates everywhere. And it can be very much a risk increase to the organization. So wearing my data security hat there, that's important to tackle before you implement a solution for data warehousing.
That's great. We've got a few questions. We got one from John Astorino. Says, I am curious on the criteria / decisions to have operations folks in each group or team versus a centralized. So it sounds like he's asking a question around how do we decide who's a part of that, and where are I would assume kind of the touch points and kind of that connective tissue, or your partner rather, across the organization. Curious if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I mean, we definitely have an ops role in all of our major parts of the organization. So as I mentioned, finance, product, sales, CX,
engineering.
Thank you. Sorry. And we meet once a week as a team, and we talk about what's going on and what our priorities are and what the impact to each other could be. Before, like maybe a few years ago, the only organization that had an operations role was sales. So it made it a struggle, because then obviously the sales priorities were the things that we're focused on, where now sales priorities are still very focused on, CX priorities are focused, every group in the organization has that opportunity to focus on the priorities and work together. You know, we're not stepping on each other's toes. We're not, a lot of times finance, we have a great idea about how we should do something because we're having a problem doing it. And so it's great having those different representatives from each of the organizations. We do meet a lot. Like I said, we meet once a week, and when there's a big project going on, we'll meet even more than that. So it's spend a lot of time talking to each other. So hopefully you like everyone.
Yeah.
But if I can add to that too, I mean, I personally think that the concept of RevOps is a little tough as one unit that's separate from all the lines of business that have to support the customer and the sales. And the reason I say that is not because all the technical stuff can't get done, because it can. The analysis, the insights, the data process, all that can get done. But there's a whole other side to ops, which is Bettina and I are partners. She is my strategist. We work closely together on way more than just systems and data and insights. It's about how the teams are structured, where things are working, where they're not. You've got the same thing with a great sales ops leader, right? They're the right-hand person to the chief revenue officer, chief sales officer, whatever it is. And they are literally strategizing on the plan for the organization, not just the tools and technology. So and different people have different perspectives and opinions on that. But my sense is that, you know, some pieces of that can be centralized, some of them can't. And what I don't want is it to become more and more like IT. And not to say anything bad about IT, but they are there to do a very specific thing. And I need a business strategist to really be by my side. There's a continuum in between too, I recognize.
I do
That's
think
great.
I do think it's important, whichever route you go. I think there's pros and cons in both. I do think it's important that if people are building across systems, especially building in systems that are touching Salesforce, that everybody should follow the same process on that. So if there's something where you've got ops leaders from other parts of the organization who are going and building, they should be following one standard process for building in Salesforce, for releasing into Salesforce, et cetera, because that's where, and I've seen this before, where you've got an ops leader on the sales side going building their own thing, ops leader on the CS side going building their own thing, not talking together, and you get something that doesn't match well when it comes into production.
That's where you need IT governance, right? So that is the powerful part of an IT team being part of that unified group in Higher Logic that Bettina talked about. Is IT is part of that. And they bring that process to bear, which is super valuable in making sure that we have a high fidelity internal product.
Yeah, that's great. And I know this kind of touches on Ben had a question, and thanks for the compliment, Ben, on my mustache. When does he's asking, you know, when does this become a business insights team versus any other team? And I hear what you're saying, Jay, is you really need that strategist person who can be data driven to really be there from a high level. And I know from my experience, I think isolating data engineering and just seeing that as an IT function and as a more transactional relationship, I think you'd be remiss you're missing opportunities to really understand, you know, where do we want to go, and how is the data going to support us to get there, and so that becomes, you know, because the reality is we must be data driven to be successful, but we can't just be laser focused on data and looking for the silver bullet within that. We need to have strategies and have that all work together. So in my opinion, I think the business insights team must live and be a supporting arm for those individual leaders throughout the organization, versus it just being a shop where folks are able to crank out pretty dashboards. Because then you get in the business of, you have an individual who might feel that their job is to produce really pretty dashboards that shine and have a lot of flash and sizzle, but they may not feel the onus to ask, you know, why is this being used, or they may not have the exposure to understand who's, you know, and so they just start tossing things over the line. And so that, I think that connective tissue and really making sure you have the right folks embedded in the right areas is key. Cool.
That's great.
Ben, you also asked a question about, you know, Salesforce tools to analyze unused fields, and you know, and have we had success? Mike, I'm curious, you know, if you think about somebody who's sitting there, I'm sure we have folks on the phone. I think I saw some mention, you know, we have a lot of tech debt. We're sitting here with, what Bettina mentioned, having way too many fields on account. I'm curious from your perspective as a consultant, kind of how do we start, or what are some tips you might be able to provide how we approach that problem?
Yeah, I think installing a tool like Field Trip, it's free on the App Exchange. So Field Trip's a great way to give a sense of these are all the fields we have in place today. And this is how frequently they're populated. Now there's some pitfalls in that, and it gives you some information off that, but you need to dig a little bit further. Certain formula fields may pop up 100% of the time, but it may no longer be needed. It's something that may show as having been populated frequently, but it may have not been populated in the last year and a half. It may be brand new. So you're going to have to go a little digging and kind of mash up the information from the physical just field list within the object themselves to mash it up against the field trip. But I think field trip's a great place to start. What I generally like to do is then have a document across each object that shows these are the fields, this is the rate that they're being used, and occasionally just throw some columns in there across departments. Is this an important field for each department? It's a way to get them to see, yeah, we use this very frequently, or if everybody says no, then it's a prime delete candidate right there. But I think that's a way to track that. I'd be interested to hear Bettina's thoughts on this too, because I know she said she cleaned up 27 fields earlier in the call, which I think is a great accomplishment. When you got so many in there, anytime you can clean up any field, it's a massive accomplishment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
We did go a little bit undercover ninja route with those fields in the sense that we all agreed as an operations team that the fields aren't correct. The fields are, they're useless to a lot of people. So we just kind of deleted them and checked to see if anybody cared in a week. Did anyone say anything? And no one noticed. So then we hid them and then we deleted them. So that's the undercover ninja route. But what we have started doing is we have started looking at the fields that we know are these legacy fields that no longer have accurate information, and we're starting there. We've made a lot of changes as we've grown, and so a lot of the subscription information or contract information is stored separately now. So we just need to get rid of that stuff. A lot of our old legacy acquisition data, we all know it's wrong. We just need to break up with it. And people are very emotional about the data. And so it's a matter of just doing it. There's a lot of junk it's
tough,
cleaning, right?
It's painful. Nobody wants to do it, right? But once you get in there, it can kind of be nice, because once you start seeing the results and the cleaner environment, it reduces a lot of debt.
We have to Marie Kondo our Salesforce page where we say,
exactly.
We're very grateful for what you've done for us, and say goodbye. So
yeah, we've also found that makes user adoption of doing the things that we're asking them to input much better, because users see 50,000 fields and they're like, it's so overwhelming. But now when they see 20 fields instead of 100, oh, okay, this is manageable. So it turns into a positive as well.
Yeah, and that really allows you to drive like a cohesive message too. I know in our experience, we're trying to pull. I'd love for the information and the perspective on our accounts that our clients have, or excuse me, our sales folks have, to be shared by our folks who are delivering these projects. And so that when we have a conversation with the client, no matter what the context is, we understand by pulling up an account page that I can see the important information, and I'm not having to dig through and decide based on my context what's important for me. But we really prescribe that and push that there. Well, wonderful. I'm sure we could keep going for another hour on this topic. I know there's some great questions, around how is Salesforce scalable, and why, at what point do I make the jump to a CS platform? At what point do I start looking at other CS tools? Great topic. Honestly, I'd love to see how we can might approach that in a future conversation. And if not us, I'm sure in the Gain, Grow, Retain community, I know there's topics on that that we've had discussions on, and I'm sure we'll continue to dive into that. I'll just say from my vantage point, that's a moving target. I think these, as technology changes and grows, and as we grow as organizations and customer success matures, I think we'll find like that answer will take a different shape as we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for your participation. I did want to mention here with the last few minutes, we do have a few opportunities through OpFocus to participate in some future conversations on the topics of revenue operations, CS, and otherwise. And so in the next few weeks, we're going to be talking about things like Salesforce community credits, Dashboard Dojo. Our founder and esteemed Salesforce guru, David Carnes, puts on a Dashboard Dojo course. You can go to dashboarddojo.com and get a bunch of content there. If you're struggling with reporting and dashboards in Salesforce, we encourage you to join that on September 8th. We're also going to have conversations around key metrics and high growth with sales teams. We're having a conversation on the nonprofit service platform. And then lastly, building and reporting on scalable ABM model, really exciting topic around marketing. So if you guys are interested, you can find out all this information on our website under events. And lastly, shameless plug, we're hiring. So if you know of any Salesforce experts or consultants or folks that want to make the jump, we are pretty much hiring for any role. So from developers to config to architects, join us. And we'd love to have you as part of the OpFocus team. Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining today. I really want to thank the panelists. You guys have been an awesome team. I think this conversation has been extremely beneficial. So folks that are on the call, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or through our website. We look forward to continuing this conversation here in the near future. All right, guys. Thanks everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Take care. Have a great